when they're doing all the sound check, for all the different percussion instruments. Well, he brought a bunch of shakers that were empty. So he'd go in there, pick it up, and just to do the sound check for all these things, and the guy's saying, I can't hear, I can't hear it to turn it up, and this guy's like, he's checking everything. It's like nothing. And they're like, oh, and then he realizes he's
drummers had Steve Gadd used to do that kind of stuff. He had a cellophane, like from a sucker, and he would just. They're out doing this, and he'd just do this. It's like, damn, this cable, something's wrong with the cable. And then he had a dog whistle.
Oh, and it would go.
And he'd blow the dog whistle, and it would peg the meters, but nobody could hear anything.
You're barking outside the studio.
He did that to try to. You're right.
Just to mess with people.
He did. Well, he did it to break because people, it's studio. People get uptight. It's a chance to kind of
Get a laugh.
That's fantastic. All right, you got that one?
Yep, we're good.
All right, y'all ready?
For what?
Well, we'll find out, I guess. So, welcome. This is episode, I said I wasn't going to say episode titles, but I'm going to do it anyways because I think it's 9 of the Music Currency podcast. And today I have with me Hans Sturm, Jackie Allen, fantastic musicians and teachers. And I've been privileged to work with both of them, actually. And we have vocalist, songwriter, and many other things that I probably don't even know, and bassist, head of Bass Association, right? And
Actually, was. Yeah, today, let's see. Today, we're recording this on a Friday. Last Saturday, I got to pass the proverbial baton. So I am... yes, I'm now the immediate past president. So I'm still on the executive board and I'm still chairing governance, but I'm finally ending my active presidency. So I'm past president.
International Society.
International Society of Bassists.
Wow. Yeah. Super cool. But yeah, welcome Hans and Jackie. I'm super stoked to have you guys on the podcast, and we're just gonna chat a little bit about you guys and music and all of that business and jazz. I was going to say all that jazz, but it seemed a little bit too...
Too late.
Yeah.
All that jazz. Yeah.
Jazz hands.
But yeah, so anyways, I guess I'll just start off with, I remember the first time I actually worked with either of you was, I think, I had just finished doing jazz theory or something, and I had asked you if I could get in contact with Jackie to do some voice lessons focused on jazz vocals and like songwriting and stuff. And from there, I remember the very first thing was we were in jazz theory, and you had said something about the harmonic sequence, and it just clicked the actual progression of intervals. And I was like, oh, this is what it was this whole time? Because you like rattled it off. And I said, I remember seeing this in my book. And so I remember because we were doing COVID classes and I was sitting down and I said, let me check my music theory book real quick. I went back, grabbed it off my shelf, and I looked and I said, that is the harmonic sequence. Oh my goodness. Why didn't I just know this? But the thing that captured me was, and it's something that I've learned from both of you, is that you're very good at being practical about music and how to use it and how to uniquely use it and leverage one's own strengths to do so. But like, how did you guys come to realize that was a thing, and how did you come to doing so yourself?
For me, I mean, the story's shorter, I guess. I mostly use my instincts, but when I hit a wall, it's where I go back and think about, what did I learn in school? It's like, okay, here's some tips. Here's some things that I learned that can maybe help me move forward. So that's how I use it. But it comes instincts first. Or if I get stuck, again, I can go back to a book and it's like, okay, if I follow these rules, maybe this, just by thinking about this, I can, play a game and see where I go with it. If I'm thinking of writing a song or even an arrangement idea.
Mm-hmm. So like, I guess part of the question is too, like, when did you start like realizing that for yourselves, especially, you wanted to teach, especially, I guess, and specifically like do music? Like, how how did you get to that point and then get to that point where you're like, you know what, I can kind of hear these things and I know how to just use these to my will, essentially. Where did that kind of come along where you started to recognize that that was something you could do and do well?
Yeah. You want to start?
Well, yeah, it's a big question because there's a lot of pieces to my story and finally settling on music, because I had always done music since elementary school. I started on violin, so I'd done music for years and years and years. The bass didn't come around for me until high school, but even at that point, I was at the place where I really enjoyed playing the bass. I really enjoyed playing the violin. I sang in the choir. I did all those. I did all the music stuff, but I wasn't sure that's what I should do, and so I went to study, liberal arts, that's kind of thing, and then because my parents are both educators, and so anyway, after a couple of years, through this transfer process of deciding, okay, I really do need to do music. I mean, this is not a thing, and I think part of it for me was my parents being educators and seeing that, because even when, if we're not teaching actively, when you're performing, you still are teaching. You're showing your thing. You're sharing a story. You're doing all that. So that's always been kind of a part of it. And I think on the practical side, because that's part of what we're talking about here. For me, it was like there was a period of time, especially around my master's and a little bit thereafter. Actually, I started a performance certificate first, but I was freelancing a lot. So I was doing the freelance shuffle, and I was living for a time in Madison, Wisconsin, but then I was living for a time in Evanston, north of Chicago. So I was traveling. I was principal of Dubuque Symphony and Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra, and assistant principal of Madison Symphony Orchestra, and I'm subbing with Milwaukee. I'm doing all this. I'm doing all this stuff, and then I'm playing jazz late at night and avant-garde stuff with Roscoe Mitchell, and so I'm doing all this, and I'm running around like crazy. And you look at what you're making, and as a freelance musician, running around, not affiliated with an orchestra, and I couldn't see myself going through that and sitting in an orchestra for the rest of my. I mean, you can still do other things outside the orchestra. I think about Rob Kassinger in that regard. You can do other things, but I wasn't really aware of that, and I knew that. So it was, for me, it was like, okay, I can teach, and I knew that because I had taught already, and my parents were teachers, and I had something up. Well, I have I have them to thank for being here, right? That part of my life, and so that was like, yeah, if I then sought a collegiate job, that occupation, I can then choose. I have my nut, and I can choose the kinds of things that I want to do as they come. I can't do them perhaps as often as I might like in certain times, but I can play jazz and do music. And I mean, tonight I go play Mahler 2.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I mean, what an incredible work, right? So I think that's. I don't know if that quite got to your question, but
yeah,
that's sort of how I came around to that, I guess. Yeah.
So one of the things that really intrigues me about the both of you is it's still related to that practicality aspect, but I know whenever I was working with you guys, you were always able to kind of think of a creative approach to making some sort of like actual connection with something theoretically for me, or conceptually, when we were writing songs or when we were working on soloing with me for the first time. I guess both of you have both done that, but when we were working on those things, one of the things I appreciated most was your ability to break it down in a way that me, who primarily started off doing classical music and only classical vocal stuff, breaking that down in a way that was palatable for me, but also I could do something with it, right? It's just, we'll do these long tones, think of where you're going, do all this sort of stuff, figure out what it feels like. It's not necessarily the entire, this is theory, just do theory, and you're fine, right? I know for the longest time, up until recently, I had had a problem with like writing and arranging for that reason, because I would think, what's the right theoretical way to do this sort of music? And those become just like what I call the music theory project hymns kind of things, where you're like, well, this functions, I guess, but it's not good music. It doesn't really move you in a direction. You're not really latching onto it. And so where along the way did you start to kind of like get into that part of your teaching and just like sell your own musical selves?
Good question. Let me sort of think how I would answer that. I mean, I came into teaching, first of all, without thinking about teaching. I was just trying to learn for myself. But I was in college and I was finding how many other students were coming up to me as a student asking for lessons. And I thought, well, this is strange, because I didn't want to be a music educator, because I thought, I don't want to just go to college or go to school to learn to turn around and teach this. I want to learn to do it so I can actually perform it. I mean, I want to do it first, but I really enjoyed sharing what I knew, So, and I thought there must be something about me that's approachable, because I'm not throwing this out there and people are just coming up to me, And even one of our professors Richard Davis, who he was being approached about vocalists. There was no vocal jazz program at UNL in Madison, where I went to school. And he said, I'm going to put a little class together and I want you to run it. So I'm an undergrad. It's like, and he's asking me to do this. So there, I start to, I don't have my own, at the time, I'm not thinking strongly of myself, but clearly other people are. So I started to, I just didn't have the confidence, but other people saw that in me. So, okay, I'm going to share what I know. And so I did. And the more I did that, the more I thought, I really enjoy teaching. I enjoy performing too. So I think where this comes from me is, over so many years working with so many individuals, teaching, sharing what I know. And, as teachers, we learn from our students so much.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of where I'm coming from is pretty organic. Some of it I took that I learned from various classes, and some of it I learned by, observing other great performers and trying to figure it out for myself. Because I didn't really have formal jazz education as far as, jazz vocals. So it's me just figuring it out. What can I do? And all of my students in some regard have been a guinea pig, but also a teacher for me. So you go to where the student is and you try to figure out what it is, you listen to them and work with them and share what you hear and listen to what they want. And if you're lucky, you'll both move forward, especially the student.
I want to jump in because what she's not saying, right? What she's not saying, because I have an advantage in the house, because students come to the house for lessons, so I hear her teach. But she doesn't come to the university and listen to a bass lesson. Occasionally there'll be somebody who comes through, but rarely, right? So she's creative in every aspect of her life. She was working in flower shops and making things, her gardening chops. She is exceptionally creative. And so I think that and super energetic. And I think that those two things, where you are able to think and see in different ways and see stuff and move and create, that becomes a real motivating factor, not just for herself, but if you're working with a student that's having a problem with a particular thing and you have a creative spirit, you're going to think creatively about how you can solve that and how you can share solutions or ideas about how to get the student to grow in this way and so on. I think this is
I don't think I'm limited by any formal education I've had. I don't think that way.
Well,
people don't necessarily learn that way.
True.
There isn't just like, okay, this is the theory book, or this is the theory of 18th century, 19th century, 20th century.
But the people also who she was very influenced by. She mentioned the name Richard Davis. Richard just died last week, but amazing bass player. He's an NEA jazz master, bassist. Teacher, but he played everything. he was going to be the first a black musician hired by a major symphony orchestra. He won the audition for the St. Louis Symphony. They offered him the job, but he was touring with Sarah Vaughan at the time and was making more money, right? So, but he recorded with Sarah Vaughan, with Freddie Hubbard, with we'd say straight ahead musicians, but also with avant-garde musicians like Andrew Hill and Eric Dolphy, but also in popular music. He recorded with Bruce Springsteen and Van Morrison on Astral Works, but also subbed with the New York Philharmonic. I mean, so he was like, he
was a do-it-all kind of guy, and we were thinking,
and so
that was a great role model for me as a college student.
Well, and then when
he can do it all, I can do it all.
Right, exactly, and that was what I sought to. That was what I sought. That was my inspiration. What I sought to do, and then also for Jackie when she left and stepped out professionally, she started working with Mel Ryan. Mel Ryan, if you're a jazz fan, you will know the Wes Montgomery Trio, the great jazz guitar player. Well, Mel Ryan was the organist in the Wes Montgomery Trio. It was guitar, organ, and drums, and she worked at the
Wyndham Hotel
in Milwaukee. Was 5 nights a week?
Yeah, 4 nights a week for about 4 years.
Man,
yeah, and so
I'm working with this great musician, and boy, that was like some of the best education ever in front of an audience. So I'd learn, like you, just working it. I'd learn a new tune a week. And boy, that's where my whole repertoire came from. That period of time where I was paid to learn more music.
See, that's awesome. This makes me think of something that I personally really wish I had more Well, I do okay with having the opportunity to do so, but I think it's more that I wish I had learned more about this opportunity earlier. That it's a great opportunity to learn and grow quickly when you're actually gigging.
The pressure's on. Yeah,
it'll put you in that tight spot real quick.
Yeah,
and I think one of the greatest things that I really want to get to my students or to anyone that I like talk with and work with is saying, hey, look, this is something that school doesn't always necessarily give you, but it will really help you a ton to do this, whether it be in tandem or separate from or whatever, to a more scholastic academic-based education. You'll learn so much. You'll learn about the reality of what's going on out there if you're trying to perform, especially.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. And short of me making this very gripey sounding, I think it would be really great to see more of that be incentivized, I think, even in school, in one way or another. It's something that I really love, and I think a lot of people just really resonate with it, especially people that are now trying to find new ways to implement musicianship that are going to require things like making videos or recording in studio or just recording at home. Everyone can record at home now.
Right, and it's great to listen back and hear yourself. You're going to be your best teacher.
Well, the Academy for Music specifically, and what's happened both in terms of, here's my $5 word, the codification of jazz education, but also classical education. Our schools of music across the country, with some exceptions, are based on the early 20th century. I say late 19th, but early 20th century conservatory model, where you go in and you study this way, and here are your classes, and they divide it up because they had so many students, and you have to, So that made sense for that time. And in jazz education was the same thing, bearing in mind that in theory, as we say, it's a rear view mirror. You're describing stuff that's already happened, and now but you need to create stuff that's going to resonate with you.
Yeah.
So there is a push right now, and there's a push here at UNL and many other places to try to open up the academy. Why is it for instance, for me, the question I ask is, why do you have to sing a song, classical song or whatever, or play a acoustic musical instrument in order to enter a school of music? Why can't a laptop be your instrument, or a video camera and so on? Why can't we begin to build this together? So I think that becomes very interesting, especially with the Carson Center for Emerging Media here now, but also in terms of where the School of Music is moving. I know some of my colleagues can get nervous about this because they've been doing this thing and they're wondering, am I going to be able to continue to
do my own thing.
to teach this thing.
Yeah.
Is there a place for me? But this is not a switch. It's not an either or proposition.
Mm-hmm.
I think they could get very excited about the possibility of really collaborating. What you bring to the table as a classical vocalist, for instance, in this setting with video and other. I mean, there are things that you can't even begin to imagine because you haven't. And so for this, I say it's the disco ball of pedagogy.
Oh yeah,
right. So you got the mirrored ball. You got a light hitting it. That's you. And then how many different ways can you see and think and yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's one thing that I think is really really cool. That idea of it's not necessarily either or, but more so both and.
Right.
There's just so much opportunity available, and I've been of the mindset for a while now that, rather than thinking about what do we have to cut, what do we have to move away, what do we have to do to add in something new, so make a just one-for-one replacement, it's more, I think one of the best ways to approach it is, what is this student, what is this individual trying to gain, and where are they trying to go? Where are they headed? And how can we best equip them for that direction and help them leverage their skill sets and all of these sort of things? I mean, my own interests have varied wildly, even in this DMA degree.
So they've evolved.
Oh yeah,
began?
They've evolved massively, and I think from looking outside, people might go, "What are you doing? How are you? Why are you doing this? Aren't you trying to do like?
Weren't you trying to do that before?"
Exactly. Like what
I'm
is
not
this?
that same person. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
I know what. I could even say 3 years ago, but let's say 5 years ago, when I was considering doing my DMA, I said, I want to teach collegiately, most specifically because I love working with everyone on every level. And that gives you the most versatility to do so, because you can teach at a college, a high school, at an elementary school, move in between, you can go wherever. And then I realized that for myself, one, I want to do that everywhere. And two, I want to be able to do that all at the same time. And the only way to really, in my mind, do that all at the same time is to put this education out there so that people can just go find it and go experience it through video. That's my direction that I went with.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of opportunities that I've run into now, especially going through a master's and a doctorate, that have allowed me to say, these are great tools to use from the school that now I have to spin a different direction than what they may have originally been intended, even because I mean, who's thinking, okay, this person's trying to produce music educational videos, produce music theory videos that are engaging, that are actually both informative for young kids that don't know anything about music much at all, adults who don't know anything about music, people that do know something about music, right? How is this going to actually connect with them and really push it forward? No one's necessarily thinking about that except me and some other people, right? And but that's not necessarily what's going to be in the structure. So the greatest skill that I think is gleaned in school, one of them is being able to find and work with mentors, because then you're able to in a more direct manner, go in that direction for whatever it is that the student is trying to do. Because some are trying to just teach, and not just teach, but like some of them are trying to teach and they really want to get good at doing that. Some of them want to just play and they want to get really good at doing that. Some of them want to do both. Some want to do different levels of either one or something totally different.
Right.
How do we make that? How do we help them to be the best they can be in that regard? I think that's great.
Right, and I think there are other ways to do it. I mean, I remember working with Nick Brignola. Nick is one of these. He's a bebop killer, but he was a studio musician because he played every woodwind instrument. I mean, he played flute, clarinet. So he was known for his baritone sax playing as a jazz player, but he played everything. And he had gone to Berkeley on a scholarship, and he said, "Wow, I mean, he came in to give a clinic at a university during one of these outreach sessions, and he said, truth be told, the only thing I ever got out of Berkeley was hanging out at the Coke machine and just getting high. It's like, oh, it's not really helpful, right? But I think part of that is that whole thing about the life experience within an institution. Of course, you're dealing with the limitations of the institution financially and in terms of the facilities and so on. When you're opening up to a video world, just reaching out, that changes. I think one of the things that interests me about how that's organized or how that's put together is I use an analogy a lot with the students about a funnel, where you go out to the edge of the funnel, the broadest part of the funnel, and you say, what is it? Like you're asking yourself now, what is it that I want to do? And how do I want to do it? Can I bring a philosophy to bear on my thought process and so on? And then it's like where you point the other end of the funnel to what you're doing. In Jackie's case, we're thinking about it. It just occurred to me. Here she's doing flower arranging or gardening, whatever. She's got this idea of how she wants to be creative, and she's pointing that at this or at something else. It's hard. It becomes very, very difficult to be everything for everybody. And you took the classes of the jazz theory class and the jazz improvisation class, which are what we call taught with classes.
Yeah.
So they're undergraduates in the same class with doctoral students in jazz studies. I'm supposed to teach jazz theory and jazz improvisation to both levels of students. Now, I create module ideas and I try to encourage the graduate students, but I have this limitation in the class. And so there are going to be times where the undergraduates are going to get crushed by George Russell. On the other hand, there are times that it's okay. The graduate students are going to get bored because I need to address some of these other issues. So it's difficult to be everything for everybody all the time.
Yes.
But how you can get that idea, that philosophy going, and then to be able to send that down the chute, whatever the topic is, and address it to different levels or different interests so that people can grab what they can grab.
Oh, yeah. And I think the nice thing is, too, that you don't have to know everything all at once at any given moment. And so it's nice to be able to say, well, I'm flooded with this information. Let me come back to it later. Because it'll still be there. It'll still be available for you to learn. I mean, I can look back and say, okay, I think now I'm ready to watch some of these Barry Harris videos that I've seen and be like, oh, I get what to do. That's a great opportunity.
It takes time for some of this knowledge. You're given the knowledge, you're presented the knowledge, or whatever. I mean, I heard this from many teachers. I was very influenced by Lowell Kreitz, who was a cellist, and he said the problem we have in the States, as opposed to Europe, where he did his study, is, you do your 4 years undergraduate, and then you go to a master's, and you probably went someplace else. And then you studied with somebody else for a couple of years. And then you went off and then you did your doctorate and you studied with somebody else for a couple of years. And they said, it's not enough time. If you really want to get everything that person has to share, the more typical sort of really old school, thinking about Germanic and Klaus Trumpf and some of those guys. Yeah, you went to live in his house. And you got a lesson in the morning. And you did some housework, and then you practiced, and blah blah blah, and then you got another lesson. And if you didn't know what you were supposed to learn by that, but you know what I mean. So you are actually living the life with the mentor. It becomes, but that's in an academic setting. How we work it. That's not really possible. Yeah. So it was interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of. I think what's really cool about even that idea is that there's opportunity, back to that both and the sort of idea, to still find ways to make that plausible to do now. I think especially now more than ever, there's opportunities all over the place to especially look at older models of teaching, education, performance, whatever. I mean, patronage has started to come back in a different way. I think a lot more similar to the idea of you're going to have Beethoven just sitting and he has patrons that are paying for him. That sort of mentality has come with the advent of things like Patreon online for people and all of these sort of crowdfunding and subscription sort of things that any one individual can do. And they can just say, hey, I want to work. I want to do this. Now it's easier than ever for anyone to get commissions or to directly work with someone. And I think that's a great opportunity to look and say, okay, how can we spin this to work now? That's a really great opportunity. I think another thing, though, that I was just thinking about was getting to where you are now and mentorship. What are some key things that you've learned across the way of mentorship, both being mentors and being mentees. Like, who are influential mentors for you as well? Or have been, whatever, yeah.
Well, we visited one of mine this summer.
Oh, yeah.
Francois Rabath.
He has a stronger relationship with a singular, mentor.
But I've had mentors before. So when I speak about numbers of years, I've studied in high school when I was studying bass with two bassists when they were available. I lived in central Pennsylvania, grew up in central Pennsylvania. And I would go to Pittsburgh to work with Tony Bianco, who was the principal there for a time at Carnegie Mellon. And then I would go to Ferdinand Marish, who was actually, he was bass player of the Philadelphia Orchestra, but he was actually more interested in steamboats, which is very, very funny, very creative guy. So I worked with them, but it wasn't until later when I was with Richard, when I landed with Richard and understood what that was about. And I spent 10 years there. So I spent, I finished my undergraduate there, and I freelanced for a few years in between. I went and did my master's with him, and I continued to study with him. And then I had for a longer period of time, and then same with Jeff Braditich. Then at Northwestern, I spent a bunch of time with him, and he had a very particular pedagogy. He had studied with a cellist, very unlike the bass pedagogy. And then later had the opportunity to study with Francois Rabath, who I thought very, very highly of, but was intensely nervous to play in front of. And so I went as a student to this clinic, this program. It was called the International Institute, put together by George Vance. And George said, "But I know you're teaching. I know you're teaching at a university level. You should come and be a teacher." I said, "Yeah, but no." I said, "But no, but I want to be a teacher. I want to come as a student and work with Francois." And George said, "Hey, everybody who comes here is a student of Francois." I mean, it was like, that's the way it was. And
that's the level here. Yeah.
Francois heard me play, and the first thing he said, why you play like that? You need to come to Paris to study with me. I'm like, okay, there's the invitation. Right. But we've been working together over 20 years. And so we saw him this summer. He's 92 now. He's still playing. He just played a recital in Domaine Forget in Canada, 75-minute recital from memory with one of his sons who accompanies him on piano. Another son is a professional juggler, works as a show out in Vegas, absolutely crazy show. Yeah. So his one son was juggling and the other was playing piano. You talk about a wild creative, but self-taught, grew up in Syria, and he says, I can say I was the best bass player in Aleppo. I was the only bass player in Aleppo. But he was somebody who inspired a lot of things. I'll just share one short story because Jackie may be mulling this over, but he had these books that had come out with his technique because when he hit the scene, nobody had played the bass like him before. His imagination was, what he did was so revolutionary for the instrument, both for the bow, the 7 families of bow strokes, and for the left hand. There were in traditional bass, there was 13 positions just to get to the octave on one string, and then they called the rest of the bass thumb position, one position for the other half of the bass. Francois divided everything up by the harmonics, by the overtone series, on the open string, 6 positions for everything, to play everything. Just absolutely brilliant. But speaking about this kind of propagating ideas, sharing ideas with people, the books, that was what you learned. You learned from a method book, right? And so he had 200 different bowing types, variations for these exercises. And some of them were like a long slur with dots. So I'm like, well, what does that sound like? I don't know what that sounds like. I don't know what that looks like. I'm looking at the book. I'm trying to do this. So I'm in France. I'm working with him, and I'm getting frustrated, and he's getting frustrated with me getting frustrated. And finally, he says to me, I'm afraid that I'm going to die without being able to share my bow arm. And I was like, that's so heavy. And I get on the plane to fly back, and there's a problem with the plane, and we have to wait. We're sitting on the plane, and I ask for a magazine, and they bring me a golf magazine, and so we're talking about this like 2000. Open up the golf magazine, and it's an article about the brand new, just came out Tiger Woods video game. And so here you see Tiger on the links with that beautiful swing. Then you see him in a skin-tight black suit with reflective markers, and they're taking high-speed biomechanics animation capture, and then you see the animation of the screen. And I had an epiphany. It was like, if they can do this for this game, it's the bow. It's the same. It's
Right.
the bow arm. And so it turns out that at Ball State, so that was wow. I went back to where I was teaching, Ball State at the time. They had a human performance laboratory. These guys were into geriatric gait studies, watching old people walk and trying to keep them from falling. But then they were also into skiers, and they had and doing videos with, so it was really interesting stuff. And so I made a cold call. A graduate student answered the phone and said, would you be interested in trying something? He said, wow, it sounds really interesting, because arts and technology, we have never done anything like this. Why don't you bring over what's that thing? The bass? Yeah, bring that thing over. So I made this. They made this little video, and they exported it, and I had it on my phone. And I get back to Paris, and I show it to Francois, and Francois says, he sees it's the biomechanic animation, and he looks at me. He says, "Why your bow still move like that?" But that we wound up making. A pair of DVDs over 10 years.
2 DVDs.
Yeah, with biomechanics animations, user selectable camera angles, all of that based upon that because he got
That
hot
inspiration,
based upon that inspiration.
Yeah, he flew over here. They went out to California. It was a major project.
Jackie's brother Randy, who was just here last night, he was the videographer, and so we shot it at Ball State. But putting all that stuff together, Apple says, yes, you can do multiple camera angles. You call up the tech. Yes, you can do that. Nobody's telling us how. Yeah. Right. It's just like, But it was quite a process. Now, I mean, now we're at a place where DVDs are not so much a thing, although they still, they still are going out there. Ball State supported it. So now I need to find a way, because as you're referencing, it's the internet that's getting everything out to everybody. That's like the great encyclopedia for everybody.
Oh yeah, and it's just so much. One of the things that I really like too about that story, because it just blew my mind as soon as I realized where you were going with that. That's like, it's so cool that, especially now, the ability to motion capture and to record all of this stuff is easier than ever too. Right. Like, I mean, we have a facility at UNL to do all of that. Like, we can really do it. We can do it very intricately. It also reminded me of a friend of mine, Morgan Cowell, I don't know if you know him, has a piano shop here in town.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And so he was telling me about these newer pianos that have electronics built into them. So they're also MIDI, but also acoustic pianos.
Cool.
And he was telling me that there's just so many great opportunities for like piano lessons. You can literally watch as your teacher is showing you the excerpts, or watch as your student is showing you what they're playing as well. Or you can record exactly what the performance was, like down to every little bit, because it's right there in the keys. You can program the MIDI to trigger lights, so you can have a light show going interactively with your music. All of this sort of stuff and more is just a great availability to what's out there and what now exists with this technology. And so there's a really great place, I think, for both the connection of music and technology, but in all sorts of different ways, music and you name it, to be able to bridge those connections, really find new ways of teaching more effectively, of performing more creatively, of teaching more creatively, of doing so many different things. And I just absolutely love that. That's something that I really love seeing and love getting into, especially myself, because I know there's just so many different ways you can approach doing music.
Exactly.
It's infinite.
Yeah, right.
And so
there's freedom there.
Exactly. Right. And so you can literally do whatever, and there's never going to be a one right way to do it. And two, there's never going to be something where everything has already been done. Like everything may have been done, but not exactly like this. So you're going to find a new way to do this or a new way to do that. I mean, even talking to like going and actually just performing professionally, gigging and like recording records and all this sort of stuff. Like, what have you seen as being like changes to that, even from while you have been and were doing it to now? Enough to take off your glasses.
Wow. Well, it's a mess right now. I mean, the traditional ways of recording musicians making money You make a record, no matter how it goes. I mean, I can remember when the record companies came out with this whole thing they were touting is it's going to be good for everybody. We got these 360, they call it 360 deals, which means that the record company now is also going to take care of your merchandising and your market.
And because that's where the money was.
You take away another stream of income, and now if you record a cover tune for streaming, the statutory rate that you have to pay as a regular person through Harry Fox is you have to pay a penny a stream. That's how much you have to pay. That goes back to the writers of the tune.
Make a penny a stream.
Right. So you have to pay. You have to pay the copyright a penny a stream. Spotify pays what, 7/100ths of a cent per stream? So you're down 93%.
Yeah, you're paying to play.
You're paying to play.
There's no income there.
Yeah,
you're losing money.
It's impossible. There are, of course, the Taylor Swifts of the world that leverage. That's another thing. But you look at that model and you say, well, how is it possible that this model, the Spotify or whatever, stream model, the CEO of the company is driving a Lamborghini and has all this money. That money's coming from somewhere, right? Clearly, the profit sharing is not correct. So that's a mess right now. And what that has done is, I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox here, but what this has done is it has made it feel like music should be free.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about this music history, but when you wanted to hear music back in the day, you had to go where the musicians were, and you had to pay them in order to play. But now you go to the restaurant, you go to your bank, you go wherever it is, and you're hearing tunes, and musicians aren't getting paid for that. It's for me,
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the key reasons why I think the patronage thing is really starting to come back, and people are selling, like, with people trying to bring vinyls back, making them and all of this sort of stuff, because along the way, people have started to realize that the idea of the streaming and of the 360, everything in that realm, right, actually doesn't go as directly to the musician as people would assume that it would outside of the space. And especially, this is something I spoke of with Cameron, our producer, right, about you could find 100 or 1,000 people that like you pretty easily nowadays. It's not that hard because of the internet. If each of those people is willing to buy an actual album from you, boom, that's way easier than it was before. And so it almost makes it to the point where streaming it on Spotify or wherever else really doesn't seem like the greatest of propositions anymore.
Right.
For sure. Because if I can record in my house, in my whatever home studio, all of this sort of stuff, it costs me maybe a couple $100 if I really needed to buy all of the equipment and buy the software or whatever to record, or if I just have a friend who's already got it or whatever.
Yeah, if you know somebody with a studio.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's much easier to get in there, do that recording, do something that's still quite solid, right, for fairly little, and then you don't have to pay to make the CD copies or anything. You just say,
that's true. You know. Yeah.
You say, hey.
I see the negative and positive of that. And some of us are just maybe thinking too old school. Like, I perform and here's a representation of a project I've done. It's a CD.
Yeah.
Or, we still find ourselves making them.
Oh, yeah.
But they're hard to sell because people don't play them.
Oh, yeah. And no cars have CD players anymore and all of this.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people will occasionally buy them at live shows because they want to take a souvenir home.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And it becomes a souvenir rather than something.
Yeah, it's a little big for a coaster, but
it'll do in a pinch.
Right.
But I think that's one of the things that, because I definitely see people coming back to wanting to have a collection of something to actually listen to. I think part of it is because of the streaming thing. People don't necessarily realize until it's kind of too late that you lose your internet connection for whatever reason, you can't listen to any of your music now. Right. Unless you just so happen to download it or whatever. If you have a CD, as long as you don't break it, right, or as long as it doesn't get all scratched up or whatever, it's almost like
Yeah.
the model of putting things on iTunes for you to buy the album on, and put it on your iPod was just the right go-between, because it wasn't necessarily a stream, but you still had the music yourself. The
Right.
artists were still able to make way more. Like if you buy an album off of iTunes of an artist, you're making way more than you would if you streamed that same album. Like,
Yeah.
so much more.
The thing, I'm just happy to see vinyl coming back, because for me that really was where it was at. I mean, first of all, it's 22 minutes a side, so that's like a perfect listening amount of time, and then you got to flip it, you got to get up, you got to interact with it.
Oh yeah.
But also the vinyl, the artwork.
Oh yeah.
You have this
Right,
big
the LP.
One of the coolest things.
You have
I've got the Headhunters album. Love it.
Yeah, but and then all the information,
Right, the room
about the
for
artists
lyrics
and-
or something about the artist.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
And you with streaming, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my favorite thing while listening. I was like, I'd be looking at all these cool pictures or reading the lyrics. It's like, oh, that's what they're actually saying.
And
Oh, that's what the,
or they have an
who
interview with the
wrote it?
artist.
Oh,
or,
yeah.
Exactly.
Like there's
Yeah.
so many cool opportunities. And I think like that's again one of the reasons I think it's coming back for sure. Because people, even without necessarily realizing it, are or being aware of it, are realizing that that's something really cool to have. It's more informative to an extent. You're really more invested into that piece of music, to that whole thing. And it's a win-win for for the artist and the person that's listening as well. So it's really, really cool to be able to interact with that stuff. I really love it. And I really like it kind of goes to that what's happened before is just happening again. We just move in cycles. We move and we see that didn't necessarily work. It kind of was to some extent, in some ways, better before. How do we kind of blend these things together?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. I
It
think
is
for
worth
sure.
noting, and it's playing the devil's advocate, but I don't like to see things end up in landfills. And
true.
when I see all these old jewel cases, for the CDs that just get scratched up and broken, and you try to ship them, and sometimes it doesn't work.
Oh, yeah.
They get damaged, and the stuff that you don't like anymore. I mean, some people may resell, but this ends up in the landfill.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. It's always that weird, difficult trade of what are you losing and at what cost, really?
Yeah, but I can see. I mean, I could see a model. Here's a model for you. Somebody get out there and run with this. What happens if when you hit the stream, that then you have immediately an access to this information and this cover of the record and so on. So it becomes a more holistic way of seeing the artist, of getting in touch with the artist. I mean, I guess you can run and go and try to find it on the website, but I don't know. This is a nutty problem.
Yeah, I think it's definitely weird. I think there's somewhere in there for an opportunity of something like mixing in like YouTube interview or something like that, but make it very easy to access and direct towards.
Right.
That's the thing, just making it a more seamless sort of experience. Because I think especially we have so many opportunities to see interviews with all these different artists all the time, and like old ones, new ones, all of this. You get to like watch them and you get to really connect with them. But making it a very low barrier to entry to be able to just say, I'm checking out this stream, boom, here's a video interview of them, right? Here's their website if you want, right? Like these sort of different interactions are really great opportunities to be able to do that sort of thing. Because I think also like no one's gonna, because of the way things are now, people aren't just gonna memorize every website for every artist that they know.
Right.
And be like, all right, I'm gonna listen to this and I'm gonna go to this website, and I'm gonna listen to this, go to this website. It's definitely much easier to find it all in one place. Right.
Yeah, otherwise they would have gone to the website in the first place.
100%.
To go listen to their music.
But like that's why you have music. That's why we have have music shops. Like it's the same sort of idea, right? Because you would go to the music shop and you would see all the records, you would see all the albums and all this stuff, and you'd be like, "Oh, this is cool," and they'd be playing one of them.
Oh, I remember back in the day in Madison. I can't remember the name of the. I'm disappointed in myself. I can't remember the name of the store, but when the new record would break, and they would say, okay, the new record becomes available, at 11. It was always late at night, 11 o'clock, and there'd be a line out the door. Everybody going up to get the album and take it home, and that was a thing, and you're talking, looking.
In Chicago, there was a place that sold Jazz Record Mart.
Jazz Record Mart,
they would have live performances. So when we had a CD that came out, was about to come out, we actually would perform. They had a space, and then we performed live.
That's super awesome.
And it was like doing a CD release. How smart of them, in the store. And they would, hey, you get your album signed, your record signed, And then you could check out all this other music. Yeah, it was a great idea.
There was it just popped into my head when you're talking about, the Spotify stream and hitting the website and having these options pop up. It was short-lived, but it was called CD Plus. And the CD had, if you put the CD in your computer, right, so you could listen to the CD and so on, but then it had video links, and so it gave you that more that kind of larger experience. But it was short lived, and I think partly because the audio of the computers that time was not great, and if you want to hear a CD and you really and want high quality audio, that's not going to be it. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that this now makes me think about is. Just, again, these are great opportunities to kind of look at a new approach to being a musician now, right? And really how to make it something that, because it's grown way more accessible, right? But with the greater accessibility, I think a lot of people just don't necessarily know how to leverage that to a point of, for me, that's why I call this music currency, right? You have the two sides of that being how to be a musician now, but then how to actually live as a musician, how to make a living as a musician.
That's how to get your music out there, and how to be there's so much to it. How to continue to be inspired to make good music.
Yeah. And so there's lots of opportunities, but I think the directions that people have to go, to know, how do I find this audience of people when I'm not going to be able to go to a record store and play songs off my new album, right? How am I going to actually be able to get the community involved, build a community, without just relying on putting them out on YouTube and hoping that maybe one day someone might stumble upon it, or really the algorithm will be like, hey, you know what? This is what everyone needs to see at 3 a.m. This is so how do you it makes me think of venues is another real big thing that I've wanted to see not necessarily a fully new approach to, but I want to see more performance venues, and I think a wider variety of them.
Well, and I think we can think, in my world, in the bass world, I'll hold up Lloyd Goldstein as an example. Very creative bass player. Back in the day, there were 3 professional orchestras in Florida. And then Michael Tilson Thomas, the great conductor from San Francisco, came and started the New World Orchestra. And this was a training orchestra. So these were, the orchestra was made up of students that had recently graduated, undergraduate, more typically masters, who were orchestral level, trying to get their audition chops together to go and play. So it was very good. It was young. It was exciting. It was Michael Tilson Thomas. He's talking about patronage. Well, I'm not saying this then that. I'm not saying there's a causality, but 2 of the orchestras folded. And then they kind of banded together, the musicians. Some made the cut, some didn't. And so now you have one orchestra that then for a time played in 3 different cities. The same orchestra would play the same program. But the politics and that thing that happened when everybody lost their jobs caused a lot of strife. And Lloyd was one who made the cut but was not happy in the situation. And so he said, I've had it. I quit. And his wife had a job, so he was cool, but financially they were okay. But he didn't have a venue, and so he started taking his bass to the coffee shop at a hospital down the street, just to play some tunes. And a nurse approached him and said, "Hey, there is a thing called a professional practitioner." And Lloyd was like, "Well, what's that?" She said, "Well, you get training, and then you play in the hospital. You play for patients."
That's cool.
And Lloyd was like, "Yeah." It was like, that sounds like, what a beautiful job. Well, so he went through the process. He got the training. So he takes his upright double acoustic bass, and he works for the Moffitt Cancer Center. And he goes from bedside to bedside, and he's trained. So he has a whole repertoire of tunes that he does. Some are familiar, some are original, some are classical, but he tries to gauge what that person would like to hear, how they're feeling, and so on. And it's a cancer center, and sometimes people live, and sometimes the bed's empty anyhow. You don't know what's happened. So it's very powerfully moving and so on. It's a really meaningful job, but it's not the kind of job that leaps to mind as an occupation as a musician. When you're thinking about, well, I'm going to go down and play Duffy's.
And what can be more significant?
Yeah.
You know that you're a one-on-one concert with someone that probably really needs that.
Yeah. That's one of the other things that I think speaks to the other side of currency. Actually, it speaks to both of them. But that there are so many different opportunities to perform or to work as musicians that are perfectly viable. I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about them, of course. And I think providing opportunity for people to learn about them is great. Because there's going to be some people that definitely would be like, I want to work towards doing that. I want to go and be the person that plays in the hospital in a cancer ward and all of this stuff. But how do I get there? Like, who do I even talk to?
How do I make that happen? Right.
Like, and like, to be fair, they may not even know it exists. So they will never even get to the point of going, how do I get there?
Right.
After this
if
podcast.
they don't have that entrepreneurial spirit, they're just thinking, okay, how can I make that work?
Yeah.
And just take a step and see where it leads you.
They're going to hear this podcast, and everybody's going to run out. And
exactly. There's going to be too many now.
LloydGoldstein.com. Everybody's going to go.
Yeah. But I love that sort of a thing. I mean, it makes me think of when I heard about being like arts admin sort of person. Like, this is a skill set that you can develop and have that is not necessarily talked of a lot. You just kind of end up in it a lot often. But I think these different opportunities for different jobs, being music adjacent is what I like to call it. Just, music stuff, you're very familiar with it, but you know what? You decided to start a restaurant, but you want this restaurant. I spoke with a friend about this, of like making a restaurant that is focused on like the style of like theater in the round. So it's meant to be a place where you actually have actors come and perform, surrounded by all the people that are actually there to eat, but also to see a show, but also they can interact. You can have a jazz performance, you can have a whatever, you can have small classical ensembles performing.
Just have a small center, a stage right in the center. Yeah.
And so like, this is a really cool like venue that people could like work in and be able to like work on new music, be able to actually do this stuff somewhere that people will already be going to, essentially. I mean, it's why so many musicians play at bars, like, and have forever, because of that reason. You're going to be there. That's how people are just going to stumble upon someone and be like, how do I get more of that? And so I'm always thinking, what are some different ways to make that happen? What are ways that maybe have existed before, again, that maybe could be revitalized, even, because people sometimes just don't think about it.
Or look at other models that are like that are successful, and how could you take that? We know a good friend of ours, bass player, Eric Hochberg in Chicago, has had a long time gig at Catch 35, a wonderful seafood restaurant downtown Chicago. And there's, he's by the bar, but there's an elevated stage in the middle, tables all the way around, and then more dining that's a little bit further removed for those that want to be. But it's it's great because people can sit all around, have drinks, and look up. It's a little elevated stage, and you have piano, bass, drums, a singer, a horn player, whatever.
And they don't use drums. It's very live, so they actually don't. But the bass,
no drums.
The bass and piano, and then the third are weekly guests. They bring in different people all the time, so it's always fresh. I saw that this last week. Ernie Watts played, the great tenor saxophonist who was with the Tonight Show band, was there. But typically it's Chicago players. But it's that's that theater in the round kind of. That's exactly
it has. It has a feel like that.
Oh yeah,
right.
Not probably exactly what you're describing,
right.
but it's still
not quite as arty.
Yeah. But yeah, I love that sort of stuff. But anyways, we're just about done. So my last question is, what is one thing, and this is a terrible question, I know, because there's never just one thing, but what's one thing that, as you've come to be where you are, has helped you to really kind of leverage your own unique experience in music and otherwise to become successful in where you are and be able to say, this really helped me get to where I am now? Or 7. It doesn't matter how many things.
I mean, I guess it's what comes to me right now is from a question you asked earlier about mentor. Well, I almost felt like teary-eyed because I had everybody as mentors, but I never had that I can point to. That was my mentor. I've been asked this in the past, and I thought, well, I guess it was Ella Fitzgerald. I would listen to her and watch her and then listen to all these other albums, and because no one was teaching me jazz vocals directly. So I guess what I just learned is just to take it from everywhere and just believe in me and say, hey, no one's going to do it except you. So, I mean, that's, if I was going to, give myself credit for any one thing, it was just like, you can't fail. You can't fail if you don't try.
Yeah.
You succeed if you don't try. Just trust yourself and take that first step. And you don't know where it's going to lead. That's the interesting part about it. And I think that's probably my success.
Well,
it's like dumb, like Cher once, the famous singer. She said, "I don't know, dumb luck." Like her success. I just dumb luck.
Yeah. Well, I think that the thinking about failure and success is kind of fascinating. Because that's kind of loaded, like the success that we found. Well, I'm so successful. Because you look around. I mean, as Francois, my mentor, would say, everyone is unique. Each actually is what he says is each one is unique. Everybody brings something to the table, and it's all different. And we need all the voices at the table.
Right.
Part of that is, you don't really learn if you don't screw up, because then you have to force yourself to get better. But I think believing in yourself goes along there, and I think the other part of it is don't be afraid. There's a meme going around with Kurt Vonnegut. It's like everybody says, well. And I was guilty of this. If I look back and think about it, he'll say, well, I can't do that because, and I see this in the studio as well. I can't do that because Bobby does it better than me, or I can't do that because Sally does that, or whatever. And I have a student come in and they say to me, well, I want to play something that nobody else in the studio is playing. And I'm saying, but why? Why does that even matter? This is your journey. This is play a piece that you want to play. Who cares who else has played it? Because you're going to bring something else to the piece anyway. Right. Don't be afraid to do that.
They want to be unique. But it's going to be unique anyway.
Exactly, because their performance is absolutely going to be unique. And this is for what? You will both be students here for another year, and somebody's going to. So, how is that really? What does it mean? So, don't be afraid to do anything, to try anything, to go for it. And if you screw up, okay. So then you learn from it. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it, right? Which is to say that, everybody can do everything. Well, no, I don't mean that, but don't be afraid to try and to grow.
Yeah,
I mean that's
right.
It takes time. It takes time.
What is success? Just to move forward in any direction, it's going to make you feel great.
Out of bed in the morning, there's a success. Right.
Yeah. Every day I'm just excited to do the next thing.
Oh yeah.
And then there's, I think, an inherent personality trait too.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Hans, Jackie, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I'm going to have to have you all on again. Don't even worry about it. It's going to happen. So thanks again. Thank you. And thank you all for watching.
Thanks.